Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, Insider Indianapolis Star with your Friday rundown for January 12th, 2024. Doing this a little bit earlier in the day. Just kind of trying to get out ahead of a couple things. Go buy all the soup and bread before the winter storm shows up. A few things to run through today. I guess start with something we had on IndyStar.com this morning, IndyStar.com/sports. Indiana's general counsel distributed the memorandums of understanding that all of us had requested for Curt Cignetti's first full staff yesterday afternoon, just before kind of close of business. And the big talking points there are Cignetti's 10 countable assistants will make roughly $1 million more. I've got the numbers over here on a notepad. Last year, Indiana's staff, Tom Allen's last full staff, was making a tick under $4.7 million per year in total. That number went up to closer to about 4.8, between 4.7 and 4.8, when Indiana fired Walt Bell and replaced him with Rod Carey. This year's staff will make, and this is not counting Derek Owings, who is Indiana's head of strength and conditioning, this year's staff will make about 5.7. And so, in fact, a little bit more than that. And I'm looking at not about 5.7, a little under 5.8 million. I'm looking at my story up here now. And that's raises in most spots. Like Bob Bostad's getting a little bit more money. Mike Shanahan, Indiana's offensive coordinator, is making $800,000, which Rod Carey was making $815. Walt Bell was making $7, so that falls kind of right in there. Probably the biggest talking point on the staff is Bryant Haynes, who was Cignetti's defensive coordinator at James Madison, at one time IU graduate assistant. Haynes was a Broyles Award semifinalist last year as JMU's DC. The Broyles Award is handed out annually to the best assistant coach in college football. And Haynes came with Cignetti to Indiana, and he will, at Indiana, be the department's first $1 million coordinator. Now, I think it's possible, and I would have to go back and run through some of the bonuses and things. I would not be surprised if Kalen DeBoer made more than $1 million in total compensation in his 1 year in Bloomington, but that would have included bonuses and performance-related incentives. That would not have when you talk about sort of someone making $1 million as a coordinator, what you're saying is that's guaranteed compensation. They're making that no matter what happens on the field. Indiana's had coordinators that made, $750, $8. I want to say Kalen DeBoer was at $850, but I'd have to go back and double. It was either $8 or $850. It was in the high six figures. But Haynes will make $400,000 in base salary, $550,000 in outside marketing and promotional income, and then he gets a $75,000, or he's already received a $75,000 signing bonus that will convert into a loyalty bonus that he'll actually get once in June, and then he will begin to receive annually on December 1st of every year he's still employed at Indiana. So that effectively is considered guaranteed compensation. He doesn't need to do anything to obtain that bonus other than remain employed. So he becomes Indiana's, the first sort of true $1 million coordinator in IU football history. All of this, obviously, I think it's fair to take as a reflection of Indiana trying to put more money into football, trying to be more competitive with football. And it's also worth saying that one of the key provisions of Curt Cignetti's performance-related bonuses was that if he makes a bowl game, among other things, every time he qualifies for a bowl game at Indiana, he gets another $500,000 in staffing money, in money to put into basically the pool he uses to hire assistants and staff. And that is every time he makes a bowl game. That's not just a one-time thing. So if he were to make, let's say, bowl games in 3 of his first 4 years, then at the end of year 4, he would have $1.5 million more in his staffing pool than he did when he was hired. So that is also, again, kind of reflective of the idea that Indiana wants to be competitive for these assistant coaches. It wants to retain these assistant coaches. And I think beyond that, it's not surprising to see some of these numbers. For example, Ola Adams is at $523,000 Adams was an analyst at Penn State, but before that, he was with the Broncos in the NFL. Before that, he was defense coordinator at Villanova. Buda Williams coming over from Colorado State. Forgive me, these numbers are right off my screen. Making $522,000. That gets him over from Colorado State. Pat Kuntz making $425,000 to bring him from James Madison. Bob Bostad again gets $700,000 to be retained as offensive line coach. And if you just want to go through the numbers, John Miller, running backs coach, $350,000. Grant Kane, tight ends coach and special teams coordinator, $500,000. Tino Sunseri, who's quarterbacks coach and is adding co-offensive coordinator to his title at Indiana, coming over from James Madison, $540,000. Rod Ojong, cornerbacks coach, $400,000, and then Derek Owings, who's Indiana's head of strength and conditioning, will make $535,000. I think he's the only one that is dramatically sort of lower. Obviously, these numbers will fluctuate a little bit based on age and experience. For example, Indiana's last running backs coach, Craig Johnson, was incredibly experienced. He'd been around forever. He coached in college. He coached in the NFL. So his number is probably a little higher than John Miller's. I don't have it right in front of me. Forgive me. But Indiana was paying Aaron Wellman, I think, about $700,000 a year. Owings will make a little bit less. But that's still a competitive number for a strength and conditioning coach, well over $500,000 annually. And the other talking point from these contracts is they are all 2-year deals. They will all expire. I think the date for all of them is January 15th, 2025. So effectively, they cover the January 15th, 2026, So effectively, they'll cover the 2024 and 2025 seasons. There is a provision in each of them that says that they can be renewed for a further year, essentially automatically, unless either the institution or the coach decides at the end of the 2-year term they don't want the term to be renewed. So that's just a mechanism for allowing for an extension without any further kind of negotiation or sort of renewal process. You can just sort of trigger that if people want it. But in the same breath, if for example, Indiana were to shoot the moon this season and go 8-4 and win its bowl game, then there's also a world where I would not be surprised if a number of these contracts get torn up and replaced anyway. So, these things are always fluid. They're always moving. But it is interesting just to kind of see this first round, again, those 10 assistant coaches, the 10 countable assistants that your offense and defensive staffs, more than $1 million more in investment in those 10 positions than where Indiana was under Tom Allen in his last year. So again, another sort of step up in football investment for Indiana. Also, in this wave of documents, I got a hold of Tom Allen's severance agreement. Not a ton in there that we didn't know. The 2 or 3 big things: there's a confidentiality agreement, which is pretty common. There's a non-defamation clause, which I think is pretty common. Probably the biggest one is we talked about that $15.5 million payment being split into 2 separate equal installments of $7.75 million. One was due within 10 days of the vesting of that agreement, which I think the official date on that would have been November 26th of last year. The other one was actually due between January 1st and January 5th of 2024. So basically, unless something has changed, Indiana has paid Tom Allen severance, and Indiana's relationship with Tom Allen, its duty to Tom Allen, its obligation to Tom Allen, all of that is essentially resolved. And the relationship between Tom Allen and Indiana University is sort of permanently severed at this point. So just kind of housekeeping, probably more than anything else, but worth mentioning here. Turning to basketball, a couple big games for Indiana this weekend. On the men's side, Minnesota tonight, Friday night, 6:30. Hopefully the weather holds out. For any of you that are driving down to Bloomington, please be safe, obviously. When you say it's a big game for Indiana, I think every game's a big game for Indiana right now because Indiana is a team that is clearly starving for some consistency. And so I don't think there's, especially once you're in Big Ten play, there's no sort of easy games. There's no soft pedal games. You have got to find your way through each of these games, building towards something better. Minnesota is a tricky team, to be completely honest with you. They're very efficient offensively, 66th in the country in 3-point shooting percentage, 14th in 2-point shooting percentage. They have started well in the conference. If you look at those numbers in particular, they're They're not shooting the three so well in Big Ten play, although they are 3-1, but they are second in the conference in 2-point field goal percentage. Just by comparison, obviously Indiana, a team that uses 2-pointers a lot as part of its offense. Indiana's 10th in 2-point field goal percentage. So you get a sense for kind of where Minnesota is. Minnesota's won 7 games in a row. They opened their Big Ten schedule back in December with a loss to Ohio State in Columbus. Since then, they've beaten Nebraska. They swept kind of the last of their guarantee games. And then here, since the restart, they've won at Michigan, and they beat Maryland by 3 at home on Sunday. So they've also had a week off here. Everybody gets 2 weeks off because of the way the calendar falls in Big Ten play this year. They're coming into this game fresh. And to be honest, they're 3-1 in the Big Ten. And while obviously Indiana maybe is not at the level that it would like to be in terms of where it's ranked, the computers and things like that, I think Minnesota would look at this game as sort of a bit of a statement, frankly. Go on the road, beat Indiana in Assembly Hall, get to 4-1 in the conference, sort of tell people you're not the Minnesota, obviously, of the last few years. You've got some moxie, you've got some toughness, you've got something about you. I think Indiana is going to have to be prepared for a pretty scrappy Minnesota team tonight. And I don't, when you looked at this game in the preseason, you probably thought this would be a bit of a easier walk for Indiana, an easier road to sort of walk. I think Indiana's got to be ready for a really tough game tonight. And Indiana obviously is in a position where it can't really let go of any home games. That's Minnesota tonight. That's Purdue on Tuesday. I think Indiana's got to be able to find a way to just sort of make Assembly Hall a fortress for the time being while it tries to find its consistency and its legs on the road. But that's got to start tonight with a game that I think is going to be trickier than maybe what probably a lot of Indiana fans expected it to be. The other one to mention briefly as well is IU women at Iowa Saturday night. Caitlin Clark, obviously, it's probably fair to say it's kind of these two teams at this point in the Big Ten race. I know Maryland will always be in and around there, and some other teams have been, kind of hot and cold. But obviously, Indiana started 5-0. Iowa has all the star power with Caitlin Clark. That's even Terry Moore, and I thought it was actually admirable that she sort of acknowledged it's sort of turned into a bit of a rivalry here in the last couple of years because these two teams have both been operating at such a high level, because Indiana has, achieved what it's achieved in the regular season, winning the Big Ten last year, because Iowa has Caitlin Clark, went to the national championship game last season. It is, the return fixture there, I think, is February 22nd in Bloomington, if I'm not mistaken. But this is the first of 2 regular season meetings between these teams, and it is probably going to be about as box office as anything we see in the Big Ten women's schedule this year. At least as things stand right now, and it will be interesting. Iowa's sold out. Mike Nizilik, my counterpart from the Herald Times, expects to be there. It's going to be a raucous environment. It's really tough to go there. I think it's fair to say Indiana's loss at Iowa still kind of sticks in the craw a little bit from last season, even though obviously the league had been clinched. That Caitlin Clark step back to win is probably fair to say it is still kind of on Hoosiers' minds. And it's just, again, it's the first of 2 games that you would have circled in red when this season began between the two teams that probably had the most serious designs on winning the Big Ten and putting themselves in the position that comes with winning the Big Ten from an NCAA tournament perspective and a postseason perspective. And it's going to be a big game. Again, I think it's probably going to be as box office and as big ticket as any game we see on the Big Ten schedule on the women's side this year. So these 2 games, I should say, the one in Iowa City this weekend and the one in Bloomington in late February. So we'll leave it there for now. That's been a little bit longer Friday rundown, but there was a fair bit to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. We'll have everything we normally have from the Minnesota game tonight, insiders, insider video, all that kind of stuff. Stay safe for the winter storm. For the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman. We'll talk to you soon.